Thanks. So welcome to the workshop on how to migrate from Angular JS. Okay. So specifically, I'm going to cover a technique that I use with my clients. Sorry, 1 second. Apologies, wrong slides. 2 more seconds, and here we go. Okay. So, as anybody who's done a large kind of transformative change in their software, a refactor, knows, it's always just a little bit more complex and risky than you first thought. But don't worry, what I'm going to be teaching you here is a technique that I use with my larger clients, those who really can't use the word big bang. So they're typically clients with, a production application with lots of traffic. Perhaps they have regulatory issues, but specifically they can't afford the downtime. They can't just change, upgrade a version number, everything breaks, everybody stops working for like 3 months, fixes everything, and then finally you get a release that you can release, right? What I'm going to cover is a technique that's iterative, that's step by step, and most importantly, at every step in the process, you'll have a releasable application that you can throw out into the wild, right? If you've seen some of my previous talks, that might make sense. But just going to ask a couple of questions to begin with. So who here is in the process of, or perhaps in the next 3 months, are going to be in the process of migrating an Angular JS application? Put your hands up. Okay, fair chunk. Keep your hands up, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Of those of you who've got your hands up, how many of you, keep your hands up if your existing application is already an SPA? Ooh, okay, quite a lot. Maybe 10% put their hands down. And of those of you, keep your hands up. Of those of you, keep your hands up if you're using UI router. Okay, so yeah, most of you. Okay, good. For those of you who put your hands down when they said, you still get your hand up. Of those of you who put your hands down when I asked if you're not already an SPA, I've got a bit of bad news for you. Angular 4 and 2 only works as an SPA. So before you begin the process of migrating from your non-SPA, your MPA Angular JS application to Angular 4, you're going to have to convert to an SPA. You're going to have to convert to an SPA during that process. So how is this structured? What am I going to talk about? Okay. So first, I'm going to cover the theory behind what we're doing, the mental model. Okay. So this thing that we're going to do, this is going to be messy. There's no way around it. I'm not going to show you my amazing ng migration GitHub repo and you just run it with your source folder and it just migrates everything. It's not, right? This is going to be messy work, right? But underlying all of that, if you're aware, there's like a really simple structure, a really clear set of rules, which if you follow, give you just a really good grasp of what's going on and just a path through all that mess over to the other side, right? So that's what if you walk away with nothing other than this mental model, then that's good. I'm happy with that. But I'm also going to be showing you a plan, ASIM's 10-step plan for migrating. It's a pretty generic one. You should be able to just use it in your projects as well. And I am going to do like a case study. It'll be something like as we go along, I'll just dip into it and just show you for each step, what we need to do to implement something in code. Now, big caveat there, this is a workshop that I'd run that would normally take a full day. So we've only got an hour. So I'm not really going to be typing a lot of code or expecting you to type any code at all, to be honest with you. But I am just going to just dive in and show you the highlights of what needs to be done for each step. So the important thing is all the code for this workshop is going to be in this GitHub repo. I'm going to keep it on the screen for 10 seconds. Yeah, take pictures or write it down. You don't need to clone it right now or anything, but what I expect you to do from this workshop is just sit here, absorb what I'm saying, and then afterwards, maybe tomorrow or when you get back home, watch the video again, go through the source code on my GitHub repo, and then things are going to start to make sense. So just use this hour just to absorb what I'm saying and just get some keywords into your head, right? But I do want to just show you quickly. So if okay. I had prepped this previously. Okay, here we go, mirroring. Okay, good. So that GitHub repo I just showed you, this is it. So it's got a README at the bottom with some instructions on how to set up. Importantly, each step in my plan is available as branches, so you can check out and have a look. But actually, I've done something a little bit different. I've actually created pull requests for each of these branches. So later on, when you start looking up and start diving into each of these steps, you can just click on a step. So let's click on step 3, for instance. And this is the step where you upgrade the Angular JS version. And specifically, you're going to be able to see the code side by side. So for each step, you're going to see the code that you need to change for that step. So I just thought pull requests were a nice way to demonstrate all of that. So later on, just go to the repo, look at the pull requests, and things are going to start to make a lot more sense. Let me get back to the old world. Yes. Okay, so who am I? So my name's ASIM. I run a site called codecraft.tv where I do training and consulting on Angular and JavaScript development. And recently, I don't know, just kind of happened, I suppose, I've been consulting with kind of large enterprise clients or those with kind of really gnarly legacy code and just really trying to help them move into the modern age. So if you're perhaps somebody who's got problems like that, come find me later on. I'm just really like to find out all the different use cases out there. You can find me here, so Twitter, @Joik. How many people here still email? I email all the time, so you can email me at asim@codecraft.tv. Something I'm really proud of is that last year I released a book on Angular called Angular from Theory to Practice. It was funded through some very generous backers on Kickstarter, so it's free, right? You can find it on Amazon, iBooks. Just search the internet, you'll find it. Or I prefer if you go to my website and give me your email address, and I'll send you a link with all the links to Amazon and iBooks and everything. And the website also has videos as well. So who doesn't love videos? So some quick terminology. I'm probably not the first person to tell you this, but it's, and it's very difficult to talk about an Angular migration without using the words 1 and 4. But anyway, when I use the word Angular, I mean Angular 4, the latest version of Angular. When I use the word Angular JS, I mean the 1 version of Angular. Now, I've done this webinar, a workshop a couple of times, and it's really confusing. Okay, so for this room only, I'm going to use the word 1 and 4. Okay, outside of this room, it's JS and Angular. Okay, but for this room only, it's going to be 1 and 4. Okay, the slides are going to say JS. If it's JS, it's going to be 1. I'll try. Sometimes I'm going to say 2, but just forgive me if I do. I mean 4. Okay. So just some other terminology in case you don't know, but in Angular 1, we have filters. In Angular 4, these are pipes. In Angular 1, we have controllers. In Angular 4, we have components. In Angular 1, we have directives. The directives which have a template, which have some HTML, these are now components in Angular 4. The directives that don't have HTML, what I call the behavioral directives, these are just directives in Angular 4. Services and factories in Angular 1 are just services in Angular 4. And I'm going to use the word entity a lot throughout this talk. So when I say entity, I just mean one of those things, like a component, a service, a something, one entity, one of those things. Now, this might seem a bit weird, but my first version of this talk, I had like Angular 1 was this darker version of red, and Angular 4 was this brighter version of red, and I just got a lot of complaints that nobody could tell the difference, especially the colorblind people. So now, if you see blue anywhere on the screen, that's going to be Angular 4. If you see red, it's going to be Angular 1, okay? Okay, so I'm going to kind of show you, we're going to be working through an application. We're going to migrate this application from Angular 1 to Angular 4. I'm just going to show you it right now. So I'm going to have to do this weird mirroring display thing again. Give me a second. So mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall. Okay, here we go. So I teach an Angular 1 course, and in the Angular 1 course, I create this application. It's a simple contacts application. You can kind of load different contacts. At the bottom, there's a spinner. You can search, sort, and delete. When you delete, there's a toaster appearing. You can edit and save, and you can also create a new one from scratch here. Okay? So this is the Angular 1 application we're going to be moving across. Now, I mentioned entities earlier on, so just imagine what entities are on this page right now. We've got something, normally I like to point at things, but this is just a little bit too big, but there's like a search bar at the top, that's kind of one entity. We've got like a list here, list, that's another kind of entity. Each of these lists have these little cards. There are other entities. We've got an edit page, that's one entity, a create page, another entity. You show the spinner, that's another entity. There's all those different entities on the page. I just want you, don't worry about it, I'm going to be mentioning this later on. I just want you to know, when I talk about this stuff, what it means on the screen. Right? So let's go back to separate display. Drink of water from a very large bottle. Okay. Oh, and as I mentioned, I'm using UI router. I'm not using UI router. A router is one of these things. Okay? We're using UI router. So as I mentioned, I'm going to show you a mental model. So we're going to play a little quiz. I'm going to show you a picture, and you're going to tell me what the mental model is. So that's the picture. Any guesses? Yeah, dual booting. Okay. Oh, clever guys. So this is a simplified view of our application. It's all running Angular 1, so you can see we've got the different entities I might have mentioned earlier on, card, spinner, list, edit, create, search. We've also got some services, contact service and contact resource, because it's Angular 1 and I like using ng-resource. So when we dual boot, what we're basically doing is we're just including both Angular 4 and Angular 1 in the application. Okay? And I literally mean we're including both libraries. So for this period of transition, your final bundle is going to have both of them in it. It's just going to be larger. That's just something you're going to have to live with for a while, right? But the advantage of, another thing, we also call this hybrid mode. Okay? So the advantage of doing that is that now we can take some of our entities and we can convert them to Angular 4, and they can live with our Angular 1 entities, like side by side, right? We've got animations? Oh, right, okay. And have you all heard of zones? We all know zones. Everybody pretty comfortable with what zones are? And we can come up here and explain what zones are to people. Zones are amazing. I've got a talk that I'm planning to give on zones, and I don't think people talk about it enough. But anyway, in Angular 2 and Angular 4, we got this thing called zones. We had scope.apply in Angular 1, and zones basically mean we don't have to use scope.apply in our code. Okay? So now that we're in this hybrid mode, you actually don't need to use scope.apply even in your Angular 1 code. All right? Second mental model, this isn't even a guess, this is very literal. It's a chameleon. So we've got like this Angular 1 entity, and we've got this Angular 4 entity. Now, you might think from what I just told you that they can both kind of live next to each other and side by side, but actually that's not exactly true, okay? What we have to do is we have to upgrade our Angular 1 entity or downgrade our Angular 4 entity. So you're going to see this in a lot of my pictures. If you see the arrow going up, I mean upgrade. The arrow going down is downgrade. And what's the advantage of doing that? Well, our upgraded Angular 1 entity can then be used in Angular 4. It can then also just be used in Angular 1 because it's still an Angular 1 entity. And it can also be used in a downgraded Angular 1. And the same goes vice versa. So your downgraded Angular 4 entity can then just be used inside Angular 1. But the technique I'm showing you, you won't really need to do that. Another important thing is dependency injection. Okay, so you've got, I've got here like a service that's an Angular 4 service that I've downgraded because it's being used in Angular 1 and Angular 4. It's not just sharing code, it's sharing the same instance of data. So if your Angular 4 list component changed some data on the service, the Angular 1 entity would still see the same data. So you're actually sharing data as well. It's the same dependency injection. Do both. Kind of struggling to come up with pictures for mental models, but anyway, so this one is control freak. So another important concept to know about the migration is that each DOM element in your tree is going to be controlled by either Angular 1 or Angular 4 in this kind of hybrid mode. Okay, so by default, it's all Angular 1. And if we wanted to change our card control to be Angular 4, this wouldn't work. The body tag, the Angular 1 just won't see the Angular 4 component. We need to downgrade. We need to downgrade our Angular 4 entity so that the Angular 1 body tag can see it. But now we've got a problem because our spinner is Angular 1, so now the card component can't see the spinner. So we then basically have to upgrade the spinner. And that's basically this game you're going to have to play during this migration process. You're just going to have to upgrade and downgrade different things at different levels to get everything to work together. And kind of the topmost component is always Angular 1. It's always Angular JS, okay, if you're ever wondering. And the final one is Plague. So this kind of just pulls it all together and explains what we're going to be doing. I love explaining to clients the migration process using this analogy. So the way I say it is we're going to infect our Angular 1 application with Angular 4. And then it's going to spread like a disease through your application until eventually it's just going to take over, right? So right now we've got the resource. It's an Angular 4 entity. We have to downgrade it to make it usable within Angular 1. And then we basically then go, oh, OK. Then we do the service. We have to downgrade it because it's being used in Angular 1. But now resource is only being used by an Angular 4 entity. So we just drop the downgrade code. And that's basically it. We just start infecting our applications. We start at the leaves. We downgrade it if we need to. Then we just keep on going up until eventually kind of everything in our application is just written as Angular 4. And then we just basically drop Angular 1, and we've got an Angular 4 application, right? But like everything is not so rosy. There's still a couple of issues. One of them is that filters in Angular 1 can't be migrated to Angular 4. You just have to rewrite them as pipes. But your filters typically should be really simple bits of code, and you can usually just copy and paste them. Also, some directives can't be migrated across. So there's some features of directives that just need to be rewritten. And as I said before, if you're using a directive without HTML, that doesn't translate into something called a component, you just have to rewrite it. So here we go, ASIM's 10-step plan, right? I'm going to show you the 10 steps, and then we're going to kind of select a few of them, and I'm going to show you the code for them, right? So I'm just going to initially just go through the 10 steps pretty quickly, so don't worry if I'm not explaining each one too deeply. We'll go into them in more depth later on. So step one, I don't know when we all started writing Angular 1 applications. I started 4 or 5 years ago. There's no style guide. John Papa hadn't written a style guide. Todd Motter hadn't written a style guide. We just kind of were winging it. We're the Wild West, right? And I just say, take this opportunity to kind of pick a style guide and just start matching it. Now, you can pick and choose whatever you want. The only one thing you really, really, really have to do at this stage is to make sure that each entity is a separate file. That's the minimum. Each entity is a separate file, because when we want to use module loading, we've got to have them as separate files. So I used to just jumble things together, but now I just make sure everything's in one file. That's the minimum you have to do for step one. Step two, use TypeScript. Use build tools. If you look at the application in the code that I've got, I use Webpack straight away. So even from step two, using TypeScript, I'm using Webpack. Upgrade at least to Angular 1.5. Okay, if you're below that, you need to move up to there. You need to move up to there because we need to use a feature that was introduced in Angular 1.5 called components. These are components that are in Angular 1 that map to component. That Angular 4 has components, and this was kind of an implementation of components in Angular 1. If we convert our Angular 1 application to components, Angular 1 components, it makes it easier to convert to Angular 4 components later on. Then this is like the really fun part. It's called the ES6ification, or the TypeScriptification of your application. So this is an opportunity for you, your team, just to go through your code, start using some fun ES6 constructs, destructuring classes, let, fat arrow syntax. Just basically start going through and just converting your code to ES6 or TypeScript, right? And you might even choose just to leave it here, to be honest with you. I mean, now you've got a pretty decent Angular 1 application. It follows a style guide using TypeScript. It's using components, and it's using ES6. So maybe you'd be happy at this stage, right? But if you did really want to move to Angular 2, then this is the moment when you start including Angular 4. This is the moment when you add Angular 4 to your application. And then what I say is you start moving your services to Angular 4. Then your components, our Angular 1 components, we now move to Angular 4 components. And then if you've got routing, I say leave routing as close to the end as possible. Okay, so do routing pretty much as the last thing that you do. Migrating routing is really simple if everything else is done, right? And the final thing is just basically go through your code and make sure you remove every reference to Angular JS. Okay, so let's start going through some stuff. And I'm going to skip 1 to 3. If you want, they're quite simple. If you want to go, you can have a look at the source code on the Git repo. There's also README as well, so you can see details for each step. 1 to 3 is fairly straightforward. Go have a look at it later on. I'm just going to dive into componentification. So some top tips for this stage. I get students asking me, like, where do I start? Like, which component is my first component? Start with the components that you have in your router, in your top-level router configuration. Okay, cool. I'm going to show you some code now. This way? No, this way. Okay. So I'm just going to show you the before and after. So before, I'm just going to show you one to begin with. So I've got the list component that we have already. Actually, let me show you the routing first so you see that. So this is just a simple UI router configuration. I've got at the top here just kind of one root, which is a controller with some template HTML. So we're just going to convert this into a component now, right? So the person list controller is the simple Angular 1 controller. We're injecting scope and contact service, right? So if I now just move to step 4, so you can see what this looks like as a Angular component, an Angular 1 component here. Okay. So if you look at the bottom, this looks pretty similar to what we had before. We've got angular.module, and we've got .component, not .controller, .component. The first parameter is like the tag name, and the second parameter is an object that describes what that component will contain. So the selector is the kind of the tag name. Now that will actually just be translated to person hyphen list, yeah? And then I like to inline my templates just because it's easy and simple. So I've inlined my template here. You can actually have an external template file as well if you want. We have binding, so this is the equivalent of scope in directives. And then we have a controller. And already I'm using ES6 classes here, okay? But controller normally expects a function constructor, and actually underneath an ES6 class is just a function constructor, so you can just use a class directly here. And anything on a constructor, on a ES6 class, this is how you inject stuff in, okay? Now, I'm not using $scope. You don't need to use, with components, it defaults using controller as syntax, which means that anything you add onto the this variable is available in the template as $control. Okay, so that's how we basically change our template to work with components. Okay? So let's go back into code. Wait, here we go. All right. And again, there's more to it than that, but again, I just wanted to give you the highlights. So later on, look at the source code, and you'll find all the other changes I've done for step 4, but it's all pretty much following the similar pattern, all right? Now it's the fun part. Now it's the ES6ification of your application, right? Now, or TypeScriptification, depending on how far you want to take it. So I recommend that a great place to start is the services. So the services are kind of the leaves of your application. So that's just a really great place to start. And also, Angular 1 services that are written as ES6 classes are really, really easy to migrate to Angular 4. So take your services and convert them into classes, right? Another top tip, like who uses $resource in their Angular 1 application, right? 20%. There's no $resource. There's no equivalent to $resource in Angular 4. So take this opportunity to use $HTTP, for which there is a direct equivalent. Don't use factories, use services, because services expect constructor functions, and classes are just constructor functions, so it makes it really easy to use. Don't bother with $Q. We've now got promise as a native feature in ES6, so just use promises. And I use a lot of Angular for each, so just use things like for of, like cool, like ES6 constructs, right? So I'm just going to show you a bit of code again. So I'm going to show you the contact resource, and I'm also going to show you the contact service as well. Okay. So if I go here, so this is just the contact resource that we've got. Can people see the cut? Is it too small at the back? You're good? You're good? Okay. So this is just a simple resource. You know, you don't have to. It did a lot of boilerplate code for you, so it's not very big. So if I flip over to the next stage, stage 5, you can see what I've done is I basically turned it into a class, okay, with properties, and I've added functions that just mirror the same functions I'd have on my $resource. And at the bottom, I'm just configuring it as a service. yeah? And I'm passing in the name's contact, and I'm passing in the class name, right? So let me go back to step 4 so I can show you the service. Okay, so this is like a simple service that I have. It's a factory, which means I'm returning an object with properties on it, and I'm calling a function at the end. So flipping this over, ES6ifying this means, just the same as before, I'm turning it into a class. The constructor is where I'm injecting stuff into it. I'm converting all those properties to functions. I'm using things like let and for of. I'm doing things like using promises instead of queue, right? And at the end, just the same as before, I'm just configuring it as a service and passing in the class name. So start with your services, then just go through the rest of your application. Just start ES6ifying everything. And I don't know, I find this the most fun part of the whole project, because then everybody's getting to finally use all this cool stuff they've been hearing about for ages. But then we've got to get into the serious business of actually migrating. So let's go. Yeah. Sorry, 1 second. My show notes have gone. Okay, my presenter notes have gone now, so I'm going to have to wing it. So at this point, we're basically going to be dual booting. So if you remember what I was saying before, we've basically got the Angular JS application, the Angular 1 application. All we're going to do at this point is just add Angular 4, nothing else. Just get it working with Angular 4. And just like a top tip with this one is with Angular 1, like one of the ways we'd bootstrap is just by adding ng-app in our index.html. So just make sure you remove that from your index.html, just so that you don't accidentally start bootstrapping your application with Angular 1. So let me show you. Oh, I know what's going on. Okay. So just to show you at the bottom here, so if I go to the package JSON, this is before adding in Angular 4. All I'm going to do, step 6, is if you see here, I've just added in Angular 4. I've just literally included it in the packages, all right? Another thing I've done, so we go source, app, main, is because we're using Angular 4, we want to bootstrap with Angular 4, we need to use an app module, okay, an ng module. So we create one, or we just create like a basic one, a basic app module. The important thing we need to do here is we need to override the ng-do bootstrap function and just make it do nothing. You don't want it to accidentally start bootstrapping our application using some other mechanism, right? And then what we do, so a lot of you who are doing Angular 2 probably recognize this code. This is how we would normally bootstrap an Angular 2 application. But then we do something a little bit different. Okay, we call then platform ref. We get a reference to this upgrade module. This is the magic module that helps us do this upgrading and downgrading and migrating to Angular 4. And what we do here with the upgrade module is bootstrap. This is basically the Angular 1 bootstrapping here, and this is the Angular 2 bootstrapping here. Okay, so this is the running in hybrid mode where we're bootstrapping using both frameworks. And there's a couple of other things. There's a couple of other files, polyfills as well, and you'll see when you look at the code online. You can just find that out and just copy and paste it in. And this code here, this will never change no matter what project you work on. This is just copy and paste code. Yeah. Separate displays. Okay. Okay, good. So then we dual booted. So now the next step is just to move our services over to Angular 4. Now, in my opinion, it's much easier to do this whole process by going bottom up. So choose your services at your leaves and just start converting them to Angular 4. Now in this example, we've got contact service, which I've migrated to Angular 4, but then I've had to downgrade it because it's being used in Angular 1. Contact resource is only being used by Angular 4, so you don't need to downgrade it. So again, some top tips. And this is kind of the really complex part of the whole migrate, is how do you deal with third-party modules that you have no control over, yeah? This is the messy part. Everybody's nodding their heads right now. This is probably where you're all at, I'm guessing. So there's no magic. There's 3 solutions. There's only 3 solutions that I know of anyway. Number 1, you rewrite it. Okay, you take this third-party module and you just rewrite it yourself. Now, it's actually not so scary. It's actually okay. With zones, doing a lot of this stuff in Angular 2 is actually really, really simple. I'm going to show you an example of one that I've just rewritten. I'll show you how simple it is just to rewrite something. The other one, I mean, Angular 2 and Angular 4, they've been out for a while now. So there's actually quite a large ecosystem out there. So have a look. Maybe somebody's already created one, right? I'm going to show you an example of that as well. And the third one is just upgrade. So you can temporarily take an Angular 1 service, upgrade it so it can be used in Angular 4. You really want to do the first 2. Okay, the first 2 are permanent solutions. The last one isn't a permanent solution, because if you ever want to get rid of Angular 1, you need to find solutions for everything that you upgraded, right? But it's useful as a technique to get you somewhere, right? So, code, right? I'm going to show you the contact service and how we downgrade it, toaster, and Egypt. Okay, fine, I know what I'm doing. So, unmirror, mirror. So let's have a look at this one. Okay, so this is still an Angular 1 service, right? Notice we changed it to classes. So if I now flip this over to the next step, I'm going to be changing it to a downgraded Angular 4 service. Did you see that? If we can have, you can ask me questions at the end. I think we don't have time to ask questions, Roy. But if you saw that change, it's actually really, really quick. It's pretty much the same as before. That's why it was really a big advantage to convert to classes to begin with. Those of you with sharp eyes might have noticed that the private properties turned to public properties. That was a mistake I made in the code. It should actually have been public all along, but didn't want to change the code. But anyway, so what we do is we just decorate it with the injectable decorator, annotation, sorry. And that's pretty much all we've done. So to now use this contact service in an Angular 4 application, we basically need to provide it in our app module. So we go into our app module, and I provide that in our app module. This makes this service available and usable from within Angular 4, but not within Angular 1. To make this Angular 4 service usable in Angular 1, we need to downgrade it. So to do that, we just go to the code, and I'm scrolling to the bottom. And there's the magic code right there. So it's the same as before, angular.module codecraft.factory, and then we do something, a factory this time, not service, and we do something called downgrade injectable contact service. This is downgrade injectable is another function that comes from the upgrade package, and this basically takes an Angular 4 service and mashes it together so it can be used in an Angular 1 as an Angular 1 service, or in an Angular 1 entity, right? That's it, those 3 lines of code is all you need. But one thing I want to show you here, so we've got this toaster. So if I flip back to step 6, if you remember here, I'm using this third-party toaster module. Yeah, this is the issue, right? This is a third-party toaster. What do I do? How do I get this toaster that's Angular 1, How do I get it so it can be used in Angular 4? The way I'm going to show you in this example, and there's other examples through this code, the way I'm going to show you in this example is by using the upgrade approach, right? So what we do, you flip to step 7 again, and I'm going to go and I'm going to find a file. I reached my calorie goal for today. So, this is basically the code. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so this is basically the code. It's a bit of a problem. Opaque token is getting deprecated, but you can still use it right now. And what this code is basically doing is you don't have to worry about it. It's just copy and paste code. But what it basically does, it takes an Angular 1 service and makes it available or injectable as an Angular 4 service. So how we do that, so we see we've got this function called toaster service provider here. So all we're doing, if I go back to here, is I'm providing it. Okay, so I've now taken an Angular 1 service and I've upgraded it and provided it into the Angular 4 injection framework so it can now be used in both Angular 1 and Angular 4, right? That code might look a bit scary, right? It's just copy and paste. All you're pretty much going to have to do this with any other Angular 1 service is just find the name of the service. That's the normal string that you use in Angular 1. Create a token to identify it in Angular 4, and just do that. It's just going to be copy and paste for pretty much every other Angular 1 service you're going to have to upgrade. And then to use that, we just $inject the name of the token we use to identify that service, and then we decorate our toaster. And now, in our Angular 4 service, I've injected an Angular 1 service, right? So that's one way we can do. That's one way to solve the Angular, the third-party module issue, right? But not permanent. We'd have to find a solution for this when we get rid of Angular 1. So let's go separate display. Okay. So we're getting pretty close. Now the next step is just to convert our components to Angular 4. So our Angular 1 components, we now need to convert to Angular 4 components, right? And again, we start at the leaves. Okay, so very similar to the services, we basically just convert them to Angular 4, then downgrade them because they're going to be used in Angular 1. And I just call this basically the grind, right? You just kind of got to go through step by step and just do one component, one service at a time. But the good thing about this approach is that you can actually you don't have to do all your components and then have a releasable application. You can do one component, release, one component, release, one component, release. So it's always a nice iterative process. Okay, time for a bit more code. So I'm going to show you the person list component, and I want to show you the spinner as well. Yeah. So let's go here, person list component. So again, this is still an Angular 1 component. If you remember, we've got the object at the top, which defines the component, and then we've got the code here, which makes it available to Angular 1. And now let's just flip to step 8. So I've just created an Angular 4 component. Okay, it's just a class. This is actually the same class that we had in our controller property on our component object in the previous, the Angular 1 component. Just kind of copy and paste it there. And kind of the important thing is now that it's Angular 4, you start having to use Angular 4 syntax in your HTML. Yeah? One thing I've done here is I was using infinite scroll. So this is just an example. I've just found an infinite scroll Angular 4, Angular 2 actually, this one, version of the module, and just started using that instead, right? And at the bottom, we've got the magic code again. We've got the downgrade code. So we've got angular.module.directive, and then we call downgrade component. We're passing in a component object. And then this now makes our Angular 4 component usable from within an Angular 1 component. And another important thing to note is that if you look at the routing, so we also have to use that component in our Angular 4 code. We have to add it to our declarations. Okay, so it was this one. But also just remember this one, every downgraded Angular 4 component also needs to be an entry component. Okay? Just remember that one. So the other thing I want to show you was a spinner. I want to show you that just so you'd see how easy it is just to convert that, just to rewrite that one. So I'll show you the original one. So this is the original spinner Angular 1 component. Now I'm using the third-party spinner, a third-party module. So in this example, I just wanted to figure out how to rewrite the whole thing from scratch, right? So it's actually pretty simple. Okay? I just use the spinner library, the underlying spinner library. This was this simple, right? It's not that big of an issue. A large part of the problems that we had in Angular 1 when working with things that weren't Angular was we needed to know when things changed so Angular could do binding. Now with zones, we don't need that. So actually, you can just pretty much use whatever library there's out there in your Angular 4 application, and it will just work, right? So rewriting things is fairly simple, yeah? And how are we doing for time? Okay. And the other thing I want to show you is we're dealing with UI router, okay? So that's another service that is an Angular 1 service, an Angular 1 module. How do we deal with that in our now kind of, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong code, 1 second. Oh, sorry, here we go. So we use different, we use $state and $state params. So if we want to use these in our Angular 4 components, we just need to do the same thing. We need to upgrade them. We need to make them available to our Angular 4 components. And just the same as before, we're just basically copying and pasting the code and just doing state params and $state. And we need to provide them in our app module. So this is how we're only doing this, we're upgrading UI router services because we're going to get rid of UI router anyway at the end. So we just upgrade them temporarily, then we use them in our application. I just cannot remember where I used it. Card component. Sorry, here we go. So because we needed to use state params, we basically have to upgrade our UI router state params service, Angular 1 and UI router state, just so we can use it inside Angular 4, right? And then we're pretty much there now. Pretty much everything in our application, we've either converted the components over to Angular 4, we've moved all the services over to Angular 4. All that's really left is the routing. And now, some people will talk about, there's theoretically a way in which you can do kind of one route at a time, like move one route to Angular 4 at a time. I don't support that method. I just think it's just, at this point, it should be fairly simple just to move everything over to Angular 4. So I call it a tiny pop, right? It's not a big bang, it's a tiny pop, right? So what are you doing? You're basically, at this point, you're basically just going to bootstrap with Angular. So you're dropping the hybrid mode, right? And you're also using the Angular router instead of the UI router. So just to show you what this looks like, we're pretty good, yeah? To show you what this looks like, I'll just hide this. So if I go to the main file here, you can see if I move to the next step, what have I done? I've basically removed all that hybrid code bootstrapping at the bottom. Now it's just bootstrapping with Angular 4. Because we're bootstrapping with Angular 4, we need a root component. We need a bootstrap component. So I create a very, very simple app root component. And then also, at this point, we have to then also find solutions for all those things that we previously upgraded. Now, for all the UI router things that we upgraded, we don't care. We're using the Angular router now anyway, so we can just drop those. And for the toaster one that I upgraded, I actually just found a third-party Angular 4 toaster, so I just used that instead. Right? But at this point is the point where you have to start dealing with all those things that you upgraded, because you need to find solutions for them, because you're going to lose Angular 1 now, right? And that's the routing. And okay, and the other thing is the routing. So now, if I go into map routes, flip back a step. This was the UI router configuration. So at this point, we're also just moving forward to the Angular 4 router. So we just basically now everything's all set up. It's all components. It's all pretty simple, or hopefully pretty simple at this moment. Just flip over and just configure it as an Angular 4 router configuration. All right? Oh, 1 second. Okay. And that's basically it, to be honest with you. And the final thing to do is that I just recommend you really take a good look at your code at this point and make sure you remove every single reference to Angular JS. We're using Webpack in this project, so even if you have like an accidental import of Angular, Webpack's just going to pull all of that in and bundle it in with your code. So just make sure you go through and remove every single reference to Angular 1 or Angular JS that you have. And that's basically it. Now you basically have an Angular 4 application. You've dropped Angular 1, and you've migrated. And maybe you feel something like this. Right? Or it feels something like this when you finally get it done. You nailed it. Yeah? So that's basically it. So if you've got any questions, there's no time for questions at the end of the session. If you want to find me, or you can email me, you can tweet me at Joy. I have an AMA. I think I got 1 question. Maybe you can make it 2. Or if you just see me around, just grab me, and I'll try and answer any questions that you've got. All right. Thank you very much.